Forgive me, because I know this is a little bit impromptu, but my mind was just working on this earlier today as I was kind of deconstructing and analyzing the game in my mind, and I just kind of felt like sitting down and talking about it, so hopefully, you'll actually enjoy. I know, I'm still working on the Kingdom Hearts series. Real life has really been getting in my way of availability to actually play video games, other than the ones I've been doing on my stream for obvious reasons. So that's the main obstacle that's been getting in the way of the Kingdom Hearts series. Spoiler alert and all that stuff. Or boilerplate, I mean, not spoiler alert. You know what I mean. Let's start talking off. Let's start this thing by getting one thing out of the way right off the bat, okay? Aside from one thing that I'm about to say, I am not going to be comparing Saints Row 4 to Grand Theft Auto 5. The one thing I'm going to compare them to is I think they are so different. However, both of them are still such good games and good in such different ways that the two, as weird as this is going to sound, complement each other wonderfully. Going from one to the other, which is what I was actually doing when I was playing. I'd play some Grand Theft Auto 5 and then I'd go play some Saints Row with Pax and back and forth, right? Going between the two actually flowed rather naturally, all things considered, because the two are so, despite both being the same type of game genre, whatever you want to call that, the feel, tonality, enjoyment, gameplay, etc. of the two was so different that it worked surprisingly well and was very enjoyable. Other than that, I will not be comparing the two. Please don't ask me to compare the two. I know I've gotten this question fairly often lately. No, I'm not comparing the two. Any further questions comparing the two or about the two in comparison will be ignored. Fair warning. Now, one other thing I want to talk about before I really get to the review proper is cooperative campaign gameplay, okay? Now, I know some people have pulled technicalities before in defining the fact that I'm going to turn off my monitor. There we go. In defining what a cooperative gameplay is, because cooperative games can be considered as many things, but when I think cooperative gameplay, I think Saints Row, I think Baldur's Gate 2, I think Neverwinter Nights. I actually can't think of that many, to be honest with you, and that's kind of my point. A game where it is clearly designed to be played by multiple people, usually two. Two is generally the optimal number, but you can sometimes go over two. And it is the main storyline. It's not another campaign. It's not just random multiplayer. It's not, like Grand Theft Auto 5's multiplayer, where it's the same setting, but there's not really any story, The main single-player story campaign is played cooperatively. Not many games really pull that off. Not many games do that at all. Now, I've said before that New Game Plus is one of those features that just about all games should have. While I would love to see cooperative gameplay in most games, I admit you can't argue that in all games in cooperative gameplay space. And the main reason why is because it's a lot harder to do from a coding perspective than New Game Plus is. New Game Plus really is not that hard to do. I'm sorry, it just isn't. It's a matter of flags and proper save coding. That's really it. Cooperative gameplay is a lot more complicated, so I will admit I can't say that every, RPG should have it. But I'd also like to point out that one of the things I used to love to do with my friend Vincent way back when I lived in Auburn, California, was I'd sit down with one controller and he'd sit down with the other and we'd play Final Fantasy VI while I controlled half the party and he controlled the other half. Now that's not cooperative gameplay like I'm talking about. What I'm trying to get across here is, I've said it before and I'll say it again, gamers are social creatures. We like playing these games with our friends, and in some cases we like playing them with random strangers, but mostly our friends, especially the kind of gamer that I tend to consider myself as. And so, one of the things that this game did, that this whole series did truly well, is add that. I cannot overemphasize how much my enjoyment of Saints Row 2, Saints Row 3, and Saints Row 4 was escalated by the fact that I was playing through it with PAX. That we could do that cooperative gameplay, So, I just kind of wanted to mention that right off the bat, after the GTA 5 thing, of course. Now, one other thing I want to talk about before I really get to the rumination proper. Very recently, someone messaged me on Steam. What the hell? Very recently, someone asked me what it is that is the difference between a review and a rumination. Yeah, whatever. And I gave him a bit of an answer, but let me make one thing clear. I do know some of you out there have purchased a game or replayed a game or looked into a game more because of my ruminations, and I think that's awesome. I know several people who really replayed or re-enjoyed games or picked up games and enjoyed them because of my recommendation, and I think that's awesome. If you have not picked up Saints Row 4, I do recommend it. I recommend it with a friend, obviously, based on what I just said. But I hate to do this because I'm plugging someone else's show. There's someone else on YouTube who is infinitely better at making a YouTube show and living off it than I ever will be. His name's Angry Joe. I'm sure virtually all of you have heard of him. He did a review of Saints Row 4, and after you get past kind of the intro song and dance routine, which is kind of dumb, all things considered, when he actually starts getting to the review, he pretty much hits it spot on. So if you're torn on whether or not to buy this game, I recommend his review if you want a more in-depth, non-spoilery way to look at it. But overall, I do actually recommend this game. Now let's start talking about why, okay? And we're going to start talking about why by talking about Saints Row the Third, Saints Row 3, okay? And Saints Row 2, but we'll get to 2 in just a second. Saints Row 3 is a game I enjoyed. I want to start there. It was a net positive. But Saints Row 3 was subpar in many, many ways. It had an amazing engine, mechanics, UI, gameplay, and overall fun as far as playing the game. I almost have no complaints whatsoever about the actual gameplay of the game. In fact, I actually can't think of anything off the top of my head, with one exception. I'll get to that in a moment. But the story... Well, let's just say that I laughably call it a story, because if you asked me honestly what the story of Saints Row 3 is, my response would be there is none. And that's not... I mean, yes, that is incorrect, because there is a story there. But it's like saying Super Mario Bros. 1 has a story. Yes, it does, but that's not the point. In Saints... And that's what I'm getting to. In Saints Row 3, the story wasn't the point. But it also felt very schizophrenic. It felt very incomplete. Not the story itself, but the way it was presented. Because it would go from being... It would go from wacky, zany, completely over-the-top fun, and then all of a sudden... And you just kind of do stuff randomly, and all of a sudden there would be a story mission, which is like trying to pretend like it's this big dramatic thing, but doesn't matter at all. And then we'd go back to just having wacky, zany fun. And it would just kind of bounce around like this. It was completely and utterly all over the chart. A little bit too much, in my opinion. And in all honesty, I kind of wish the story wasn't there at all in Saints Row 3. Like, it was completely ejected. I don't fully mean that, because then we wouldn't have Saints Row 4 the way it is, but I'll get to that in a minute. There were a couple other things I really didn't like about Saints Row 3. First of all, there were no characters in it. I'll pause for a moment for you to immediately fling stuff at your screen and say, "You're lying," or "You're wrong," or "You're an idiot," or, whatever. You can use whatever phrase you want, I don't mind. There were caricatures in Saints Row 3, not characters. No individual character in all of Saints Row 3 received any significant amount of character development, analysis, growth, depth, anything. The most interesting character was Kinsey Kensington, and that was primarily because she was a stereotype full out and through. And I actually have to give credit to the voice actress who did Kinsey Kensington. The voice actress and the voice actors in many of these cases did help make the characters the caricatures still enjoyable. I'm kind of pulling it technically on myself, but the point I'm trying to get across here is that they had no depth or breadth or anything. If you could imagine for a moment, I talk in length about how even the minor characters in Final Fantasy VI had some level of development, depth, etc. to them, right? Saints Row 3 is like the exact opposite of that. You could just picture cardboard cutouts running around and being played on hand puppets. That's basically the characters of Saints Row 3. That, the story, and the third thing I'm not going to mention, which is the frustratingly irritating difficulty of the game sometimes. Artificial difficulty. It was always artificially difficult. The game was never genuinely difficult. Anytime it threw difficulty at you, it was artificial difficulty, and it was frustrating. It wasn't fun. If you'll forgive me for quoting another reviewer who makes more money than I ever will in my entire life, Yahtzee over at Zero Punctuation, he had a wonderful way to put it. I don't remember what the game was he was looking at, to be honest with you, but he was talking about some game where he was talking about the difference between frustrated, angry, and determined angry, basically. And the point I'm trying to... I guess I could just ignore the reference. I don't have to reference him at all. But the point I'm trying to get across here is that this is a thing many other gamers have experienced. I'm sure you have as well. The idea of something that pisses you off so much that you just want to put the game down, or something that's so difficult that makes you really want to try and beat it. There's this distinct difference between the two, and it's really hard to narrow down what it is. And speaking as a designer or developer, it is really hard to hit that sweet spot. I've talked about the sweet spot many times before in terms of difficulty. So, Saints Row the Third had basically, the whole game was really easy, except when it was frustrating and it made you want to put the game down. Pax and I, as we were playing through it, actually did put the game down on several instances in our quest to 100% it. because it was just pissing us off, you know? Now let's talk about Saints Row 2. Saints Row 2 had buggy, problematic gameplay and a bunch of problems from being a semi-older game. Um, they were basically trying out a new engine. I'm not going to go into full details, but the bottom line is it had its issues as far as gameplay-wise, but the story was really good, all things considered. And there was a story, and there were characters. One thing Saints Row 2 did very well was it had what I like to call moments. When you had to ice Carlos, I believe his name was, when you had to kill him because he had been dragged around town by a chain to the back of a pickup truck. When Aisha died, and then you bury her, and then the scene after that, graveyard scene. You know, there were moments, there were scenes, they were impacting, they were very well done. They elicited emotional response, to put it in the most mundane, robotic way I can. And I liked that. And that really sang to me. That's pretty much what I remember most about Saints Row 2 was those moments, those scenes. And everything you were doing had some reason, some explanation, some sense make to it, right? Rather than just, go do this. And like I said, Saints Row 3 was kind of the exact opposite of that. No characters, no moments, with one exception, I'll talk about that in a moment. And just random, drive around with a lion in the back of the car for no reason. What? Now, I mentioned there was one exception. Let's go and get that out of the way. If you do the bad ending to Saints Row... This is another part of that schizophrenic thing. If you get the bad ending to Saints Row 3, you have this horrifying scene where several of your mates, I can't even remember their names, but one of them, Shondi, die. And you kill him. And there's this horrible scene as you're sitting there, and you call on the phone, and Pierce says, was it worth it? And you just hang up the phone, and you look off morosely. The end. It was a very Saints Row 2 style scene, which is funny because it was in continuity. As we now know, thanks to Saints Row 4. And it felt completely and 100% out of place with the rest of the game, but that's okay, because the canon ending has you going to fight a luchador mob boss who has made a moon base on Mars. Yeah, you know what, never mind. That's much more in keeping with Saints Row 3's tone. Now why do I keep talking about these other two games? Because Saints Row 4 is a phenomenally incredible game, and it's because it mixes the best of two of the both of these. The gameplay in Saints Row 4 is outstanding. It is smooth, intuitive, fun, interesting, engaging. It was never artificially difficult. Not one side mission, and yes, I have 100% in Saints Row 4. Nothing was artificially difficult. Nothing was overt. Nothing was boring. Nothing was grindy. Nothing was pattery. Nothing was bad. All of it was fun. Huge thumbs up for that. Now, I want to pause for a moment here to talk about something. A lot of people give the game flack for being the same engine as Saints Row 3. Indeed, for being, for all intents and purposes, in many ways the same game as Saints Row 3, because it uses, same control schema, same graphics, same engine, blah, 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 blah. Let's give these guys some degree of credit, okay? For example, first of all, they do a lot with that engine. They do so much with I almost don't want to spoil this for you, so if you haven't played this game, I'm going to give you just a moment here. Because this isn't a story spoiler. But this is a spoiler, in my opinion, and I'll explain why as soon as I spoil it. 3, 2, 1. There's a part in this game where you have a side-scroller beat-em-up, where you're actually playing that. And they actually do that with the in-game engine. There's a top-down tank game that you play it with tank shoot 'em up, or a tank thing, like back in the, I don't even remember the name of that game. It was back in the arcades, back in the 80s. There's a section of this game where there's a text adventure. You actually go through a text adventure in the game. Again, rendered with the game. You get where I'm going with this, right? The whole game does so much with that engine, and they are so creative with it. This is something I've talked about before, the idea that someone who is limited can sometimes be more creative than someone who is unlimited, because within those limitations, they try to figure out how they can get what they want, and it just works better for them. I'm a writer like that myself, as I've said before. I work better with limitations than with unlimited situation. So they do so much with that engine. They have so much fun with it. The superpowers fit so smoothly and easily into the gameplay, it's almost silly. Because it's literally the same general control schema that you were already using for running, jumping, all that fun stuff. It's just, and all they added was one button, Q. That's all they had to do was the power button Q, and using the function keys to quickly and easily, by the way, I'm talking about the PC version, obviously. I imagine this is the same for the console. To quickly and easily swap between, whatever superpowers you were using. And one other thing they did very correctly, and this is something Saints Row 2 and 3 both did to some extent or another, was they had there be a point to doing all the side stuff. Not only was there a reason, because it was all about disrupting the system, and each time you do it, you get a little bit of dialogue from whoever's giving you the missions. And in fact, sometimes it was self-referentially humorous because, for example, David Anderson. Wait, did I get his name right? Anyways, Anderson. No, that is wrong. Damn, what is his name? Okay, that's gonna bother me. I gotta look that up real quick. I feel like I'm mixing up names. You know me, I'm so bad with names. Give me just a moment. Damn it. It's going to bother me so much. Keith David. There we go. David Anderson is the name of the frickin' character in Mass Effect. Whoops. Okay. Keith David, playing as Keith David. Yes, that's the character. He has a couple of things where he's sending you off to do something, and he just is so obvious and overt in his, I want you to go blow up these people, because it's kind of like campaigning, right? That works. And he'll actually say that, like, that's a close enough connection, right? Go ahead and do that. It was funny. And he doesn't do it all the time, too. There is usually some genuine explanation for why you're doing this. And then the other times it's just, and they always bothered to do that. They never bothered to just they never failed to use the instance to either make a joke or advance the story or the character in some way, shape, or fashion. They always used every instance of it. That was a very well done job, and props to them. One of the other things they did, as I mentioned, is there's always a point. The unlocks, the new abilities, the new types of stuff, the new weapons, the new the outfits. There's always something you gain from doing these missions, and it's not just random X for leveling up. It's always something to actually flesh out and give you more options and give you more fun. And that's another thing I like that the Saints Row series as a whole has usually been pretty good at, giving you a reason to do this stuff rather than just go do it, Now, let's make this clear. I understand sometimes fun is fun, okay? I do, I get that. But I am one of those gamers, and I know I'm not alone in this, that always likes there to be some kind of, not reward, but just some kind of point in doing something. So, it could be a story thing, it could be a lore thing. Sometimes the reward could just be a few extra lines of dialogue from this guy, but that's something that makes it more worthwhile to people like me. So Saints Row 4 did that very well. Next thing I want to talk about is the, should I talk about that now or later? One of the other things they did, the game very much has a Tron feel to it. I know it's compared to the Matrix a lot, and with good reasons, but overall, other than like 2 or 3 Matrix jokes, the entire game feels like it's getting a lot more of its vibe from Tron. And I'm kind of referring to the old Tron, by the way, not the new Tron. And in a good way, the whole working through the simulation and bringing it down, all the little mini games you do, very much a Tron feel, very fun. And all the new mini games they added were a lot of fun and really took advantage of the new system, the new game, the new everything, the new powers they had, and the new setting they had with Saints Row 4 and with the Zin and all that fun stuff. Now, let's talk about something else. I don't really have an order for talking about all this stuff. And I apologize because this is just going to sound like me praising the game a lot, but I do want to explain why I am praising this game so much as best as I can. So hopefully you can understand where I'm coming from on this. One of the other things I like is that there are characters in this game. I know I just talked about this with regard to Saints Row 3, but there are. The boss has a decent amount of exploration. So does Kinsey. So does Matt, of all frickin' characters. So does Pierce. So do the Shondees, yes, plural. And so does Keith David. Not a lot on Keith David's part. Keith David basically plays Keith David who's playing Keith David. It's a very that kind of a thing. So it doesn't really work as well as it otherwise could have. But it does still work, all things considered. So yeah, okay, I'm with that. And so forth and so on. Pretty much every character, with a few exceptions, obviously, gets some kind of development in this, and some kind of examination in this, rather than just being around and being a caricature. Not as much as I would like, admittedly, but there is stuff there, and that's a good thing. Furthermore, the actual story is surprisingly engaging, as narrated by Jane Austen, of course. The story itself is at once beautifully over the top, but it never actually goes into zany. It is exactly... Okay, one of the things I liked about the Expendables 2, specifically the second one, not the first one, was it was completely over the top. It knew it, and was relishing in it. It was just swimming in it. It made no attempt whatsoever to be anything but us. Probably a better example of what I'm talking about is actually The Last Action Hero. If you've never seen that movie, it's one of Arnold Schwarzenegger's best, in my opinion. It is a great movie. And it was great specifically because not only it parodied itself, but it absolutely unashamedly was just over the top awesome the whole time. And it's hard to pull that kind of thing off, but Saints Row 4 does so beautifully. You know, aliens invade, the Earth is destroyed, giant robot suit, power armor, nuclear stomps, you know, all this stuff. It sounds so over the top, but it never has that feel that Saints Row 3 did, where it was just wacky, unconnected, disjointed, and otherwise just like a blob of jelly. It was much more like a much more cohesive force, and it was always in service of the overall enjoyment of the game. So very definite props there. I would also like to say that the writing definitely received a bump up in overall quality. In terms of the research they did, in terms of the effort they put into it, I'll talk about effort probably last. I probably should have done effort first, but whatever. Overall, they showed their work. They showed their research. They really put a lot of put their chops on display, and the writing is both interesting and there's actual variance in the overall writing style between the characters, and the Zinyak is brilliant. Zinyak is one of my favorite villains of the modern era, of anything I've seen recently, because he's so over the top evil. At the same time, he is so wonderfully polite and intellectual and calm and surprisingly well developed for a villain. I laughed so hard when the main character and Pierce were singing in the car, and Zinyak just kind of starts singing in along with him, and they don't even notice at first until he's just like going full bore, singing exuberantly at the top of his lungs along with them, and then both of them are like, "Oh my God, what's going on here?" It just completely ruins the song for both of them. It was so indicative of his personality. Why? As I was talking about most recently in my Frozen Throne lore run, just because you're evil does not mean that's all you are. It is possible to be polite, nice, kind, interesting, engaging, and have depth while still being a villain. Let's make this clear. Zinyak was a hideously evil person, but he was still a character, and that's what I like about him. Another good example of this is, well, I'm sorry, no, I don't want to go into that, but now let's talk about references, okay, referential humor. If you are a geek, and if you're watching my show at all, and especially this far in, odds are pretty good you're a geek. So welcome, brother and sister. Or both, or neither. You will find at bare minimum one thing in this game that references something you like, and it will probably make you grin. Because there are so many references in this game, and I'm not even talking about just the obvious stuff like Tron and the Matrix and stuff. I could not possibly list them all. There are at least in the hundreds of references to games, cars, books, movies, old sci-fi, old fantasy, basically you name it. And if there is some genre of existence, I've talked about this before when I've defined geeks and the difference between geeks, nerds, and dorks. A geek is purely just someone who really gets enjoyment out of something and therefore really puts themselves into it. As much as I like to put it, whether it's about cars or whether it's about movies or books or technology or science or sodas or horses, you know, it doesn't matter what you're a geek about. What matters is that enthusiasm and that enjoyment and joy you get and gain from what it is you're interested in. A huge amount of geek culture is present in this game. Again, pretty much across the gamut. I probably got a little bit too much of it. By that I mean I recognized the references and the humors because there was a lot of it, and I got a lot of it, and that probably makes me a really big geek, to be a little bit blunt. But my point is that every time they did it, it was obvious they weren't just aping it. Let me explain what I mean by this really quick. If you were to, say, have a movie in which Kirk dies and Spock kills Khan, and you present it in the way they did, it's pretty obvious you don't actually get what you're referencing. And I hate to say it like that because it sounds so pretentious, but it's true. What you are doing is you are trying to show that you get it, that you're with the in crowd when you're not. I shouldn't say the in crowd, but you're part of this group. You're one of these geeks who also cares about this thing, but you don't. And this is not just true to Into Darkness. This is something that's been true across fiction and presentation and entertainment media forever. Someone who is obviously trying to look like or present themselves as though they know about or care about A, B, or C, when they obviously don't. For whatever reason. There's good and bad reasons for that. Generally, that's what I define as a dork, actually. Someone who wants to, is basically a wannabe geek and isn't. Um, in Saints Row 4, it is very obvious that each of the references were done by at least one or two people on their development team, and they had a huge development team, who genuinely got what they were referencing, understood the value of it, understood the humor or the enjoyment or whatever, because each one of them was very, very, very well executed. Some of them were incredibly subtle, and each time it was very appropriate. It was something that really got across the point of it, and that's kind of how you do referential humor properly, in my opinion. It has to be appropriate, and it has to be something that's not completely over the top and in your face, unless you're trying to do that because it's relevant to the point one, if you get where I'm going with it. And they did that a lot in Saints Row 4. So that also leads me to my next point. I like to ruminate about games, movies, books, everything. I like to really analyze things. That's what I enjoy doing. But one thing I cannot truly analyze, well, okay, yes, I can. But one thing that I don't want to analyze almost is what this game really did for me, and that has made me smile. So much of when I'd play Saints Row 4 just left me grinning. We'd do a mission, and I would just be like, oh, that's awesome. Yes, we get to run around in power armor. Okay, this is cool. And Matt's gonna fix it up in like 3 seconds with these awesome guns. And then it's gonna break because he complains that we only got 6 seconds. Yes! Oh, that's awesome! Oh my god, we're actually controlling tanks from a top-down reference. Dude, this is actually a side-scroller shoot 'em up, or beat 'em up. Ah, yeah, The game left me grinning a lot. And it really succeeded in making me enjoy the overall experience. And I'm going to go ahead, I know this is going to be kind of a short rumination, because, long story short, I think this final point is the ultimate reason why Saints Row 4 is good. This is just a belief, this is a theory. And I have talked about this before with regards to other things, with regards to Voyager and Deep Space Nine, for example. It is my opinion that something that was done because it was your job to do it, or because it was something that you were paid to do, something that you don't care about, but something you are not invested in, is going to be of an inferior quality to something relatively equal made by someone else who honestly cared about putting out a good product. I could give an example of that isn't Star Trek, although you're probably going to hate me for it. In my opinion, Mass Effect 2, whatever other downsides there were about the game, and there were downsides, let's be honest, I felt the development and production crew on that game cared. It felt to me like one of the reasons that game stood out for me, and still stands out for me to this day, is because the team really put forth a lot of effort into it, and it was on display. They really showed their work. Like I was referencing this earlier. They really showed how much they actually wanted to make a good product. They had a degree of passion for the game, if you could forgive me for putting it in such terms. Mass Effect 3 had a few portions of the game that felt like that, but most of Mass Effect 3 felt like it was made by someone who was just doing their job. It felt rather formulaic, rather by the numbers, and it just generally lacked the energy, exuberance, enthusiasm, and passion that, Mass Effect 2 did. And I feel like that's one of the big reasons why. Yes, there's many other reasons why. Let's not truly get into it. I just wanted to give one example. I could give several others if you really wanted me to. Which is tough because I can't hear you. I'm sorry, we haven't perfected that technology yet. Talk to your YouTubers as they're YouTubing. God, that'd be terrifying. Anyways, I just get a dozen people asking me to play The Witcher. But seriously though, in my opinion, Saints Row 4 was genuinely made by people who cared, who really wanted to put on their best. If you read any of the behind-the-scenes stuff or any of the stuff they were talking about, when they were developing it or the making of and stuff, I really get this feel that these people felt like this was going to be their last game, what I like to call a Final Fantasy situation, okay? In brief, for those of you who are not aware, Final Fantasy, the first one, the very first one, way back in the NES, or the Famicom rather, was made by a group of people who felt like it was the last game they'd ever make. And so rather than giving up or tossing in, they knuckled down and made the best damn the game that they could. They wanted to make their last game their biggest one. They wanted to really put their mark on it and put their star on it and say, here, we made this. And Final Fantasy was, of course, a smash hit and produced many, many, many excellent games and a few bad ones. But my point is, that is the exact same feeling I get with Saints Row 4. This is the end of the Saints Row series. We really, whether it is or not is irrelevant. We wanted to put forth our best. And Saints Row 4 is very much not only a love letter to the fans, but to the series as a whole. It's the kind of game that the developers themselves would probably enjoy playing, is another good way to play that. Another way to put that. And if you don't understand the significance of that, generally a developer will not play their own game because a developer is usually sick of their own game because they spent countless hours constantly going over their own game in minute and ridiculous amounts of detail. You know what I mean? I feel like the people who made Saints Row 4 really put forth their best. The writing was top-notch. Tons of references, not just references to geek culture, references to culture, references to old styles of writing and music and artwork. Beautiful juxtaposition. One of the radio stations in the game is Zinyak performing, old literature like in poems and plays, like Shakespeare, for example. One thing he did to Romeo and Juliet. Now let's make this clear. I'm actually well versed in Shakespeare, and I hate it. I hate Shakespeare. I'm just going to say that flat out. So when someone brings up Romeo and Juliet, my first reaction always just go, ugh. So don't have that reaction with me, okay? Just bear with me. Romeo and Juliet, ugh. He was playing Romeo, and Zinyak was fully throwing himself into the role. And they had the reporter, whose name I can't even think of, the reporter with this strange accent. I can't quite do it. The very nasally voice. She was in Saints Row 2 and 3 as well, doing Juliet, except with her completely normal voice. No emotion, no nothing. It was really well done. And even though it was just Romeo and Juliet, the way they did it was so hilarious. I actually just sat there and stopped playing the game for a minute to just listen because it was making me laugh so hard. Now, okay, I've done nothing but gush about this game. And cooperative gameplay, wonderful everything. If I did have something negative to say about it, they would be thusly. Number one, the game's a little bit short. I do not hold that against it, but it's a little bit short primarily because of all of the disastrous efforts that went through it with regards to THQ falling apart and some budget and time issues. And long story short, I don't blame them for it, but it is unfortunate because it's such an amazing game. Point two. This is kind of a nitpicky thing, but when Pax and I played through Saints Row 2, we had no real issues other than gameplay bugs. When we played through Saints Row 3, we had virtually no issues whatsoever. When we played through Saints Row 4, reloading and constantly reconnecting to each other became so commonplace that it became a regular part of our routine. Now, we still did it because it was still fun, it was still worth it, but the point I'm trying to get across is Saints Row 4 was a little bit on the buggy side and a lot on the problematic side for the multiplayer, for the co-op, and that's unfortunate. I know it's been patched as of now that I've beat the game, of course, but I just wanted to mention that. One other thing I want to point out really quick. I could talk about the sex scenes, which range from disgustingly hilarious to awesomely hilarious. My favorite would be King's. I can't remember his first name, but the King one where you ask him to. Yeah. I won't spoil it for you. But and for reference, no, you cannot romance Keith David. I'll just spoil that for you. And I could talk about the ship actually looking a lot like the Nebuchadnezzar from Matrix and having the whole Normandy feel to it. I could mention a lot of things, but let's really talk about one thing in specific. One of the things that really I want to show my work on and how these people showed their work is the simulated Steelport, okay? Obviously, they basically took Steelport, moved it over, and copy-pasted it down. But I have heard a lot of reviewers and a lot of gamers say that, and say it in such a derogatory manner because they're idiots and not paying attention, okay? Yes, they took the base model of Steelport and copy-pasted it over. And then they spent God knows how much time going over and meticulously changing little details everywhere to actually give it the flavor and feel of the simulation. Is that less than making their brand new map out of nowhere? Possibly, but credit should be shown where credit is due. because the little glitches in the simulation, the signs being changed, all the changes to make Zinyak's head be on everything, or make the billboards and stuff, the stop signs and the little and the street signs that actually move and change as you're going through it, the differences they made to the stoplights, which actually have Zin technology in it, and a lot of the buildings and whatnot. The glitches within like certain parts of the section, like some of the water not functioning properly, or the way that the buildings would load in that very Tron style, the outline thing, or the way that the way that the ah I actually lost my train of thought there. God, I'm sorry. It's been a long day. Uh, the long and the short of this is, I feel that that's an excellent example of them still caring despite being limited in their overall scope and the way they were processing it. Even though they were still working with Steelport, they did a lot with it, is what I'm trying to say. Rather than just throwing it out there and just completely copy pasting it, they actually bothered to go in and manually or automatically, I do know they did quite a bit of this manually, change everything. And none of it has anything to do with story or whatnot, other than the signs, of course. But you get my point. My point is, none of it was necessary. And this is another thing that really shows that caring thing I've talked about. When you go into the detail that isn't necessary, that it literally only adds to the background or the setting or the flavor of it, in my opinion, most of the time that shows that level of caring, that shows that level of commitment, that shows that level of passion and exuberance, because they want to flesh out even the stuff that you don't really care about or notice unless you're really looking for it. And that, I think, is Saints Row 4 in a nutshell. I'm sorry I don't really have much else to say. It is a phenomenal game, and I strongly recommend it to anybody. If for whatever reason it's not your thing, I understand. We all have our preferences, but I would recommend you at least give it a shot if you can get it on sale or whatnot. Something like that. I don't know. So, I'm going to go ahead and shut up now and stop talking. I know, short video, but whatever. Peace.